So thank you for joining us. This is our second webinar. I'm Clive Savacool. I'm the founder of LogRx and a career paramedic and firefighter. Um, and even though LogRx is designed for narcotics tracking and helping agencies with inventory management, we use these webinars to help educate people in EMS in general. And Sydney Jacket, our newest board member for our company, I've worked with her for several decades as a firefighter in Contra Costa County in near the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I thought that this would be a great opportunity to use her background after she left the fire department and what she branched into. So really quick, I want to thank the Carlson Center with the Traction Lab. They're at Sac State, our hometown, and they've been super supportive with us on these webinars. So they're hosting it today. So at this point, wanted to turn it over to Sydney. She can give you her background, and then we'll jump into the topic for today.
Thanks for having me. Like you said, I was in the fire service for 23 years. I was a battalion chief before I retired. And about 15 years into my career, I started having some really significant health problems, and my doctor couldn't figure it out. They thought I had leukemia. They thought I had thyroid cancer. They basically at the end were just like, we don't know what's wrong with you. And so I found a functional medicine practitioner and regained my health, and then became fascinated with the idea that if you do the right things for your body, you can heal it, and started looking around me everywhere in the fire service and saw people with all of these symptoms that are all warning signs that there is some dis-ease in the body, and just knew that that was what I wanted to pursue. So I left the fire service to open a nutritional therapy practice in Florida. And so that's what I do now. I work mostly with first responders and other kind of higher stress individuals and the effects of stress on the body.
Excellent, excellent. So I can say from personal experience how basically my entire adult life I've had sleep issues. I got in the fire service at 18, became a paramedic at 20. And so I've subjected myself to the bad sleep my entire adult life. And so I think when I started in the 90s, a lot of us didn't recognize, or it wasn't even really part of the education at that time on having good sleep management and so on. And so I think as I progressed my career, I didn't really have the education and knowledge and experience to know what the early signs were. And so just out of curiosity, what should a manager look for with their staff on either the early signs of issues that are related to sleep deprivation and then some of the chronic or long-term effects?
So sleep is the most important process for any sort of repair in the body. And so it sleep deprivation can manifest itself differently in every individual just based off of their health history. But how it manifests in ways that you might see it as a manager is behaviors that are out of character, someone who is normally has a pretty good attitude, who is angry, grumpy, whatever. We see this a lot with people who work a lot of overtime. As they progress in their career, they're grumpier and grumpier, and that's not just them getting old. That's um, the lack of sleep having an effect on the body. And culturally, I think that we are a group of people who wear sleep deprivation as a badge of honor, and that sleeping feels weak and unproductive and lazy. And it's really the complete opposite. It is, sleep is an anabolic activity. That is how you regenerate tissue. That's how you build muscle. That's how your brain cleans itself. That's how you file your memories away, how you process trauma. And so when you're not getting sleep for an extended period of time, like your whole career, especially both at home and at work, um, then you're just setting yourself up for this long, slow decay into where you end up retiring and you're already unhealthy.
Yeah, I think probably everyone can relate to those that kind of leave on a I don't want to say a sour note, but just burned out, frankly.
Yeah.
Um, which then kind of continues on for those people that don't get treatment, which was kind of another big challenge I've dealt with since my early career of going to the doctor and asking for help with the sleep deprivation and the insomnia that would occur when I went home. And I couldn't tell you all the different medications I've tried, and all of them would always make me too groggy the next day. And so I gave up on those years ago. Um, but I looked at other things working with you on different solutions outside of those. And so wonder if you can kind of cover what the effects are of the medications and then what the alternative treatments might be.
Sure. So the medications just make you unconscious. They don't actually allow you to go through the deep sleep and the REM sleep cycles. So when you do pass out and are unconscious from your medications, you're not actually doing any of those processes I talked about before. And I know that they're also very habit forming, but basically you're kicking the can down the road feeling like I got some sleep so I can keep pushing forward. And what it allows you to do is to keep damaging the body even more because you haven't allowed it to do any sort of healing while you were unconscious on those medications, in a nutshell.
So what might be a better approach then?
Well, I'm not going to say that those aren't necessary for some people at some point, but we have gotten so far away from what our bodies need from an evolutionary standpoint. So if you think about, we were not designed to be awake at night. Otherwise, we would have really good night vision. So as humans, if we're awake at night, our brain perceives that as something is wrong. And particularly in our field, where you're awake at night with lights and sirens and you're trying to function at night, that is a body up message to the brain that things are not safe, things are not okay. And so when that happens, all the other processes in the body basically get pushed to the side because when you're in fight or flight, you're not digesting, your hormones are not operating properly, you're not going to get good sleep. And so being awake at night has major impacts, not just that night, but down the road. And, they've even proved in studies that I think it's 2 hours of loss of sleep over 11 days can cause you the same cognitive impairment as being zero point 0.08 alcohol. And we are a group in as first responders of people who have a tendency to push beyond exhaustion, push beyond pain, put ourselves last for the greater good. And so I think that we get really good at telling our bodies, shut up, you don't need anything, and you keep pushing forward. And so you start ignoring some of those signs that your body is not well. And like I said, it manifests a little bit differently for everyone. There's a couple of patterns that I see often in my practice with first responders, but for the most part, what we do is we take a look at what are all the underlying causes or behaviors that are causing you to not sleep well. So we've gotten really far away evolutionarily from the way that we would that our bodies would have wound down for the evening. Anyone who's ever gone camping, right? Who sleeps good when they go camping? Who falls asleep easy when they go camping? Most people, right? Because you don't have artificial light, you're not looking at a TV or your phone, you watch the sun go down and then you look at a fire and then you go to sleep. And we have gotten so far away from that with our devices and our LED lights that it impacts our body's ability to release melatonin and to manage cortisol to allow you to fall asleep. And so when people tell me, "Oh, I need the TV on in order to fall asleep," it like makes me cringe because you're doing the exact opposite of what would allow your body to release the hormones to signal your body that it's time to sleep and it's safe to sleep. So the behaviors are the most important changes that people need to make before we start looking at even supplements and then before we look at pharmaceuticals. So we start with morning sunlight because that sets your circadian rhythm. To see the color of the light in the morning tells your body to have its cortisol be high, and then that sets the rhythm for the rest of the day. And then in the evening, I like to say like about 2 hours before bed, usually after dinner, if you can go for a walk and see the sun lower in the sky, the colors go into your brain and basically say, okay, let's lower cortisol, let's get ready to release melatonin and start those processes in the body. So the worst thing that you could do is sit in front of the TV and eat your dinner and then watch TV while you scroll on your phone until bedtime, and then just go to a different room and watch TV until you fall asleep, because you're short circuiting all of the natural signals that your body would get by behaving in a more natural manner. So the devices and the TVs are probably really, really big issues causing people to not really get the right signals. The other thing is not to sleep right, or not to eat right before bed. So I like to say, like, give yourself a couple of hours to digest, because if your body is still trying to digest your food, it's already doing a process, and now you're asking it to do something else, and then your blood sugar might not allow you to fall asleep very quickly. To avoid alcohol and THC, and I even say melatonin. Like, I use melatonin in my practice as kind of a last resort, because we want to give your body the signals to start releasing it itself. So we want to try to start working with the natural rhythms and ask your body to do what it is designed to do in the first place. And then I have a lot of tools that I recommend people to wind down with. If you're not a reader, there are sleep stories and sleep meditations and different music that you can listen to. But as far as that goes, that's what we call sleep hygiene, is that 2-hour routine before bed. And if you start it at about the same time every day, then you start working with your body's circadian rhythm. And so it's like immediately when you start that process in the evening, it's like when you train your dog. They automatically know the schedule. Okay, now we're doing this. And so you start training your body that this is what's coming next. And all of the enzymatic and chemical processes in your body that need to happen to allow you to fall asleep start cascading, because it's getting the signal this is what's about to happen.
Thanks. I think I'm guilty of all of those. In fact, I even have a TV in my camping trailer, but
I mean, I wasn't trying to call you out, but I was
that's
kind
okay.
of calling you out.
If anybody can, you can. Um, so I think that one of the challenges I found with the sleep deprivation are the memory issues. In fact, I've even been to the doctor, and they'll give me numbers, and they'll have the whole routine on testing my memory, and they found that it was not like a short-term memory; it was long-term memory. And they said part of it is just being a firefighter and a paramedic, and your brain tries to block out some of the things you've been
Hmm.
to. But they said it's not a smart bomb; it's a carpet bomb, and so there's other things that it just wipes out your memory. You just don't always
Yeah.
remember. So what can you say about the memory factor in being a firefighter, paramedic, and EMS in general?
Well, this isn't really my expertise, but I will say that there's more than one thing at play, right? So the sleep part, where your body is where your brain's filing away memories, it kind of sloughs off, okay, we don't need these, and it puts the other memories in the right place. Um, that plays a role, but also your nervous system does a lot of that to try to protect you too. And so I think that we develop, um, I don't want to say habits, but tendencies as first responders, where we become really comfortable in a slight, if it's a 1 to 10 scale, and 10 is like full on fight or flight, fighting for your life, we get pretty comfortable hanging out around a 6 or a 7. And that becomes like what our nervous system and our brain feel are really safe. Unfortunately, that's far enough into the fight or flight that our brain is not doing some of these things properly. The other thing is besides filing away memories during that deep sleep and REM cycles, there's a lot of cleanup that your body does. So your brain doesn't get rid of any of its waste when you're awake. You have to be asleep, and it cleans up all the metabolic waste in your brain. So that's why you can't think as clearly when you're sleep deprived. That's why you're more irritable. Your synapses just aren't firing as well. And so when we undervalue sleep because it feels unproductive, we need to realize that you're just compounding this issue more and more and more. And so I think there's, like I said, two issues. There's the sleep part of filing memories, but there's also that nervous system trying to protect you from what you may have seen. And the way it works with fight or flight is you can feel like logically in your brain like everything's fine, but your behaviors can be telling your brain that things are not safe. So like I said, even just being awake at night, your body perceives that as not safe. And so it's going to always be that body up signal sense to your brain that things aren't safe, and you might not be able to file away that memory. So PTSD is much more prevalent in people who are sleep deprived. Depression is much more prevalent in people who are sleep deprived. Sleep deprived people are much more likely to commit suicide. So we know that there are significant impacts on the brain when you have long-term sleep deprivation. I'm just not a mental health expert, so I'm more like this part down.
Gotcha. So with recognizing, so for a manager, you want to be able to recognize this in your folks. Sometimes it's not always apparent. Sometimes we all have bad days. You might have someone that's just grumpy for whatever reason, but considering we actually probably have a lot of agencies that are small that are watching today, what can a smaller organization do as far as resources, peer support, and so on that can help with not just giving these people an outlet? Because honestly, as a fire chief, I was probably the last person that people are going to come to for help, because I was just, they didn't know me as well. I came from the outside, so they're going to go to another member of the department first, most likely. And so, what can some of these under-resourced smaller agencies do to have something for their folks?
Are you saying for as far as sleep goes, or in the whole wellness in general?
The wellness in general, because of sleep deprivation, signs and symptoms might be a symptom of a bigger issue, right?
Yeah. So I would say, just from my experience as a captain and a battalion chief, and I was a founding member of our peer support system. Like you said, it is critical that people have a pathway to go and get help. And so, even as a smaller agency, if you don't have the resources, meaning the people, there's still a lot of stuff available to you. Um, we were able to, one of the things we did was we streamlined the EAP process. I think that it was really misunderstood. People thought that reports were going to get back to the department. I had a person who was working on the helicopter who was struggling with anxiety, really bad anxiety, and he did not want to go use his EAP because he was afraid he would get pulled from the helicopter. And so what we did is we went through the EAP process and made sure it was as streamlined as possible. And we educated our people that, number one, I'm not getting a report on who used it and for what. I just get a report that so many, hours were used. So the concept of confidentiality is really important with people. Not just because they're concerned about maybe, being pulled from a program, but losing their jobs, or um, the culture as far as being judged for having anxiety, or whatever. But streamlining that process and putting it in an available way for them to know the exact steps to go to get help, so that when someone is in a crisis, they're not trying to wade through pages and pages of policies to try to figure out how to get themselves some help. Um, it costs you nothing to streamline that and put it in a 2-page document and make sure everybody understands how to use it. Um, Another thing that we were able to do with our personnel is, when we started the peer support team, was creating a culture of um, like it was a really sacred space where it was a judgment-free zone, where it was confidential. We never ever talked. Word never got out about what was said in those rooms. And so the people on the peer support team naturally became the people that would get calls when someone had a non-work related crisis and needed assistance, because we knew how to direct them in the right place, but also had proven ourselves worthy of helping them and keeping their secrets. So there's the EAP and the peer support process, and I think just streamlining those things for your people, I think shows that you care and that you're trying to provide them the answers in a non-intrusive way.
That brings up a great point that we talked about in the past, and it was a term you brought up of organizational betrayal, which I think, having been an administrator, there's times when you might have an unhappy workforce, but it's not as obvious why. And so when you brought that up to me before, it kind of put some things into perspective. And so love it. And I had never heard that term before you mentioned it to me. So I love it if you can kind of cover that topic.
Sure. Yeah, I think like I said before, I think that we are a group of people who does not recognize when we need rest, does not recognize when we need help until it's too late. We push and push and push, and we set our feelings aside and we set our symptoms aside and we keep going. And what causes that breaking point, I think, in a lot of people who don't recognize that they're kind of at the end of their rope, is one thing where they feel like their organization, after everything that they have sacrificed for them, does not stand by them or does something that lacks integrity, or doesn't back them up. And so that organizational betrayal, I feel or have seen, is sometimes just the last straw, and now you've lost that person. It's going to be really hard to bring them back at that point, I think,
Yeah.
just from what I've seen, in my opinion.
Yeah, and for everyone that's not familiar with the term EAP, that's Employee Assistance Program. Some agencies have it internally, some they contract out, similar to like a health insurance, and basically it's an anonymous source that you can go to. They have operators 24/7 that an employee can call, and oftentimes these programs will have resources such as a counselor, and if they go through the EAP to talk to that counselor, there's usually a discount, or they might even get like the first 2 sessions free. And so the agency that Sydney and I worked at Contra Costa County, they provided that for us, and it was a good resource. I would,
Yeah, and
sorry,
oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to follow up with one of the things I forgot to say this that they did that also didn't cost the agency any money was we had people go out and find clinicians who were trauma informed, who had worked with military and first responder personnel, and who were willing to take our EAP insurance, basically, and had made a commitment to make time for people from our department. So, in a lot of employee assistance programs, you call and you get approved and you get an approval number, and they give you 5 names of therapists in your area. And you might call all 5 and none of them are taking new patients. And so now, if you're someone who's in a crisis, how likely are you to call back and get another 5 names to then get turned down again? And so we cut that piece out for our people and showed them that we cared. And we had a list of clinicians that we knew they could go to and not explain what a day in the life of someone on an ambulance looks like. That the counselors already knew. And it doesn't cost you any money to get those kinds of commitments from people.
Nice. And for anybody listening, if you don't have like a peer support program or something like that, I've developed policies in counties I've worked in, and so if anybody wants to reach out to me or through LogRx directly, I can get you a copy of a policy we developed. So if you don't have anything in your organization and you're looking for some sort of policy template, just shoot me a message either through our contact on LogRx, or you can reach me on LinkedIn. So another form of treatment that for me personally is extremely hard because I have ADHD, but the meditation aspect. And I know that you and I talked about the program Headspace in the past. So what can you say about those kinds of treatments?
Meditation and breath work are, in my opinion, the most undervalued tools that we have available to us. When it comes to breath work you can do anywhere, driving in the car, washing your hands, whatever. And so it's a great, amazing tool. And it's another body up to the brain signal that everything's okay. And so it's one of the things I use a lot in my practice because there are so many misconceptions about meditation. And sort of fell into meditating. I listened to a podcast about it and thought, oh, I'd give it a try. And then I was kind of into it. Even before I went to nutritional therapy school, I was into it. But I didn't tell anyone. I was a closet meditator. I was not advertising that that was a part of my life, but it was really improving my performance, my cognition, my attitude. I feel like one of the things I say all the time is that meditation gives you more bandwidth. It's like opening lanes up on the freeway. You just automatically can handle more. So one of the ways, it's like an entry level way into meditating, is using an app to do guided meditation. And so how I found Headspace was we actually were able to get 100 free subscriptions from them for our agency, and they may still be doing this program because we found it so useful that when our year was up of those free ones, our department paid for the whole county to have access to the app. And to sell people on meditation, a lot of times I tell this story, which is totally true. And I think it's really impactful. This is when I was working as a safety officer, and I had just gotten my hands on those 100 subscriptions. And like any good big bureaucracy, we had to have several meetings before we could roll out these free subscriptions. So I was holding on to them for kind of a while, and had lunch at a station. And there's this dozer operator who works there, big 6'7", angry, manly duck hunting dozer operator. And we got to chatting because the engine got a call while we were waiting for lunch. And he mentioned that he had gone to see a functional practitioner because of his health, and that they wanted him to go to yoga. And this guy, 6'7" duck hunter, is not going to go to yoga in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's just not going to, that's not his thing. So I said, why don't you try meditation? I happen to have a free app that you can try. I just got my hands on it. So he actually downloaded it right then and there. We got him signed up. And of course, months go by. We still haven't launched our program. And I see him in the middle of the night at a fire because I'm the safety officer. And he comes around from the side of the building and stomps towards me and says, thank you so much for the meditation app. It saved my marriage. And I'm pretty sure it saved my life. And he said, but you not better not tell anyone ever that I'm meditating. I was like, your secret's safe with me. I'm glad it's helping. But fast forward, I started getting requests trickling into me of people who, oh, I heard about you have all these free apps. Can I get one? So I had probably given away 20 of the Headspace subscriptions before we even launched the program, because it was so impactful on his life that he started, telling people about how awesome it was and convincing them to go get the app downloaded. So I think that you have to go into it with an open mind. You have to recognize that meditation is not the same thing as clearing your mind of all thoughts. So people with ADD, guided meditation is great because the guide tells you where to put your thoughts. And you don't have to sit there cross-legged with candles and a mantra. It's really not about that. It's about learning to be comfortable with being quiet and present in your body, and training your nervous system to that's a safe place to be, and that you don't have to be chasing distraction and chasing busyness to keep your nervous system in that state.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would say for someone with ADHD, where I do not have a calm square into my body, I'm always spinning. I use the Headspace. It's the soundscapes, and so
Mm-hmm.
I put on the cabin rainstorm,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
so because my brain, I kind of just need some sort of distraction with noise sometimes. So, um, and just for clarification, Headspace was free to Contrast to Fire through kind of like a sponsorship, right? But it's not. Is it free to the general public?
No, they do have their first 30 days is free. So they give you a free trial. Everyone gets it. And they're on sale right now. I just saw it on my Instagram. They're like 40% off right now for individuals. But I just kind of happened into that. One of the guys who was working in the training division at the time. His wife was a teacher, and they had given the teachers a bunch of free subscriptions. So he said, "Hey, I work for the fire department. Can we get some?" And then he basically said, "Here you go. Here's do what you want with it." And so I took it and ran. So it was a complete fluke that I just fell into it like that.
Yeah. And there's others out there. I know my medical insurance suggested one. They actually, my medical insurance was willing to pay for it. I can't remember the name of it because I got the Headspace already.
Calm is often paid for by
That was it.
insurances. Kaiser, I know Kaiser pays for Calm. So that's a way that you can get it paid for. There is a free one called Smiling Mind. It doesn't have the depth or the like choose your own adventure vibe. Like you can't go on and go, "Oh, I'm having anxiousness. I have only 8 minutes, and I don't like that guy's voice. I like this guy's voice." Headspace has just got a huge library, and you can really choose what you're in the mood for. The Smiling Mind doesn't have that depth, but it is completely free.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, so what, you have all these different ways of treating kind of the challenges with the sleep deprivation. Um, and we have some brothers and sisters today from the law enforcement side. So I'd say just from the first responders aspect in general, I think everyone's getting overworked. So both law enforcement and what's changed is in the fire service, it's actually getting hard to recruit. When we started back in the late 90s, you'd be in line with thousands of people for a job. And so everybody's getting overworked now.
Hmm.
Law enforcement, EMS, firefighters, what can they do with maybe their time off to help manage? Because if they're getting forced to work a ton of overtime, varying shifts, especially for law enforcement, if they're working during the day and then having to be forced to work a night shift or something,
Hmm.
the body just can't compensate. So what would you say is the best way to approach what they can do to manage these kind of rough working conditions?
Sure. So I think that recognizing that the nighttime sleep needs to be sacred. You need to plan to be asleep for about 8 hours, and that needs to be a sacred part of your day off, if at all possible. I know with small children, there's times in your life where you can't do anything about that, but otherwise, that wind down and then 8 hours of sleep needs to be one of the like most important. Like it is the closest thing you can get to a magic pill. Like you're not gonna get fit, you're not gonna lose weight, you're not gonna get stronger, you're not gonna perform better if you can't sleep. So creating a sacred routine around your nighttime sleep is important. Napping is also really beneficial. If you can nap less than an hour and a half, 90 minutes is probably about the max that's good. Otherwise, it might interact with your nighttime sleep or your circadian rhythm. But napping needs to be seen less of like a lazy non-productive activity and actually recognize that it is productive. It is productive because you might connect better with your family, you might have more patience with your kids, you might be safer tomorrow when you go to work. Whatever it is, you need to recognize that in our society we don't value that, and we really should. And then the other thing is recognizing how important it is when you're not at work to do everything you can to switch your body out of fight or flight and into parasympathetic mode, which is also known as rest and digest. So when we go into sympathetic mode at work, fight or flight, it's this really incredible thing that our bodies do. Your pupils dilate, your blood pressure increases, your heart rate increases, you have epinephrine and adrenaline and cortisol spike, and you're faster, stronger, and it's amazing. And that is how we do heroic things. And so I don't want to make the sympathetic nervous system the villain, but we do not need to be in that state when we are at home. And as uncomfortable as it can be to learn to switch off, it is vitally important for your health and for your relationships and your longevity that you learn how to switch out when you get home. And recognizing some of the signs that your body feels unsafe in that, like you were saying, we were talking earlier about people who when they come home it feels more stressful to be at home than it was to be at work, and that's your body going, this does not feel safe. Connecting with my family, I need to bring my nervous system into a mode that it can connect, and that's not safe for me. And unfortunately it becomes a feedback loop for us where at work, you switch into that mode, you go do the thing, you stayed alive, your brain's like, this is the mode we want to be in. This is how we survive. This is it. And it feels really good. It feels really good to have that cortisol and adrenaline um, going through your blood all the time. And so it's really hard to want to switch out. I am admittedly a caffeine addict. I drank energy drinks for 15 years of my career. And sometimes on my days off, I would drink two so that I could keep going and doing all the things that I wanted to do for the day without having to take a nap. So um, I think that that awareness and that recognition to try to do the things that bring you out of that mode are going to be the most important first steps so that you have the space to cook a healthy meal and actually digest and absorb the nutrients and so on. So, but um, it requires a culture shift because napping is lazy, right? It's not, but it's the most productive thing you can do, but we perceive it. Napping is lazy. So I would say shift that.
Yeah. No, it's good. I remember thinking, I'd get off shift having very little sleep and think, okay, I'm going to go mountain bike ride or ride a dirt bike or something to stay awake because I don't want to waste my day off. And I'm going right back at this tomorrow, so I'll just go to bed early tonight, which I never did.
My,
But
my
it,
husband used to go, did you get 4 hours? Because that was our code. Like if I had gotten a chunk of 4 hours at one time, then then he would have me and we could go do fun things instead of me needing to nap, which is insane to think that that was appropriate.
yeah. Um, so we talked briefly about like you mentioned melatonin and how kind of the effects of the prescribed drugs are. But I've talked to you in the past about like magnesium, and there are certain vitamins where a lot of us would be, especially me, where I read very little, and so if someone tells me, "Hey, this vitamin will help you out," then I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I'll take some more estrogen. I guess I need that too." So I basically listen to people around me, and sometimes we get steered in the wrong direction just because of some topic that maybe doesn't apply to me individually. And so I think there's a misconception on how those vitamins on the shelf at the store they're not bad. And so, but you kind of were enlightening on how no, you don't want to take too much of, certain vitamins. And so can you cover briefly on or some or what you think are the best approaches with when it comes to vitamins?
Sure. So my mindset with supplements is I want my clients to be on the fewest amount possible to maximize the effect. And when those clients are really good about making the behavioral and lifestyle shifts, we really maximize what we're doing supplement wise. So, for example, if I had you and you were having trouble sleeping and I add magnesium to your routine and you go, oh, it's not helping me, but you're still watching TV while you scroll on your phone the 3 hours before you go to bed, then it can't really overcome that the way that maybe an Ambien can, right? So I, with my clients, it's really hard to get them to understand that you have to pair these supplements with the proper behaviors. Otherwise, you're really just trying to band-aid things. I like magnesium for sleep and anxiety because most of our population is deficient. We burn through it when we're stressed. We burn through it when we're sleep deprived. It's involved in 500 or more processes in the body. And our soil is deficient. So we're not getting it the way we used to from our vegetables. And it's pretty harmless. And it's one of the ones that you kind of just pee out if you have a little bit too much. So I like to start there with a lot of people with a good one, ideally chelated, because if you've ever taken too much magnesium, you know that you get loose stools. So when it's chelated, it's a little easier on your gut. So I like to start there with magnesium. And the only caution I would say with the other sleep formulas that are out there is they throw a lot of things in, and a lot of times they're beneficial, but I don't know if you can tolerate them. So for example, there's one on the market that has like melatonin, L-theanine, GABA, 5-HTP, uh, some herbs, as well as magnesium. And you, in particular, might not do well with 5-HTP because of the way that it works, interfaces with serotonin in your brain. And so I don't like just blindly following an influencer's advice or someone who says, "Oh, take this," especially because sometimes, especially with like the things like GABA and 5-HTP, they can negatively interact with pharmaceuticals that you're on. So if you're on any kind of SSRI or anything like that, you absolutely should not be taking something with 5-HTP in it. So I like to be really cautious. I take a really cautious approach, and I try to, my mindset is that let's support the processes in the body and see if we can get your body to naturally start getting into that rhythm rather than covering it up with a pharmaceutical or even a supplement that's just going to knock you out.
You mentioned a good one. How do we know what a good one is? And are there brands we should look to or ones we should stay away from?
Um, that's a tough one. I'm a little bit of a snob. I don't buy my supplements at Costco or CVS or Walgreens. Um, because I prefer to have supplements that are what we call bioavailable, and they're made from a natural source rather than being made in a lab. For a lot of um, uh, nutrients, you can make them in a lab and they look chemically maybe the same, but our body might not react the same way, or it might be that one more enzymatic process needs to happen in order for us to use it. And so now you just have expensive pee because your body didn't have the resources to deal with that. So oftentimes practitioner grade supplements that I use are packaged with synergistic supplements that help are information that tell your body how to use it. And so I would just word of caution and do your research. And then, I'm always happy to, like, I have a sleep. If you go, I think I provided you the link. Um, you can go on my full script. I have a sleep support. There's two supplements on there that I recommend to people, and you can purchase practitioner grade supplements on there. And I think I have the discount on there as well, so it's automatically discounted. But I'm a little bit of a snob when it comes to that. I don't like my stuff that comes from some random lab in China, and I'm not going to do that.
We'll put the graphic up here in a minute with a way to contact Sydney if you're looking for specifics or even a source for vitamins. So I have one last question for Sydney, and then we'll jump into questions from the group. So anybody that's going to have a question, start thinking about it, and you can just throw it into the chat. And my last question for you is our diet. Especially, I know when you're working in the middle of the night, you have like the absolute worst diet. I mean, I remember as a new paramedic on the night shift, we would go to Denny's, and they used to advertise the Grand Slam for 199, and I'd get two of them.
Yeah,
And it's terrible for you, you know? And I think that with our shift work and the sleep deprivation, our brain just goes primitive and says, just get calories. And so just wanted to cover diet really quick before we go into the questions from the group.
that's a really good point that you brought up. When you're sleep deprived, your insulin resistance goes up, and so it's almost like you're kind of a diabetic for the next day. Um, Most of us don't make good food choices the next day after we're sleep deprived because our brain is just looking for glucose to try to function. And so that is a very real thing. And I think first responders, if you're in a patrol car, if you're in an ambulance, um, it's even harder. I have a client recently. She said she works in a really busy system, and she said I have 9 minutes from the time that I transfer patient care to the hospital to be available again, because we were trying to figure out how she was going to eat enough because she was under eating, eat enough food, but also chew it thoroughly and swallow and eat in a rested state. And she said, well, I have 9 minutes. So if I transfer the patient, do my PCR, and go use the restroom, when am I going to eat? Because the system is so busy that as soon as she comes available again, she's going to get another call. And so there are some challenges that, like, it's just not reasonable to expect that you could eat in a calm rest and digest state, and eat in a slow and digest your food well and chew really thoroughly. For some people, that's just not their reality at work, which makes it just that much more important when you go home. because I think that there's some of those things are just insurmountable. Obviously, prepping your own food that you know what's in the ingredients is going to set you up for that. But I recognize that a lot of my recommendations for the way that you eat are virtually impossible for some of our first responders while they're at work. And so you just got to do the best you can. I mean, you and I have been there where we finally sat down to lunch at 4:30 and get another call. And so you shove 4 bites of food in your mouth before you run out the door. Um, so I think you just have to do the best you can as far as that goes and recognize that when you're sleep deprived, you're not going to make good choices. So if you try to take that decision away by food prepping really good food or having a culture in your station or on your bus that you prep your food and you eat, um, and then just doing the best you can because, like I said, some of those just seem really insurmountable issues.
Yeah. I can remember on more than one occasion when Sydney and I were working, we worked on a busy truck company, ran about 3,000 calls a year, and we'd go to the grocery store and get a fire on the way back to the station. And by the time we got back to the station, whatever we bought was bad. Been sitting there for a few hours. So yeah, and then I'm sure we just went out, got pizza or whatever we could at the time. Um, okay, so at this point, we're going to throw up a graphic for ways to contact Sydney. If you have any direct questions or want to look into our program, and then we'd like to go to questions from the group. And so please just throw your questions into the chat. Until I see one, I guess I'll just start with asking. I think we probably have a lot of folks watching or listening that are in a managerial or supervisor position. And so I want to see if there's any other advice you might have for people to be either proactive or maybe they've just got an entire workforce they're not sure how to deal with. I know I had one captain one time say, at some point we're just going to be too fatigued. We're going to make mistakes. And at that point, when you're a supervisor and you hear an employee say that, like, well, shoot, am I obligated to take them off work right now? If they're saying they're
Mm.
tired of work, what do I do? If I keep them on and something happens, they can get hurt or worse. Public can get hurt or worse, and I could lose my job, which would probably be the least bad thing of all those. But just wanted to get your insight on what a manager or supervisor might do in those situations.
I think that creating a culture where rest is okay. You know, when I worked at Cal Fire back in the day, it didn't matter how busy we were the last 3 nights. You didn't sit down until after dinner, and that to me now, making looking back on it, of course I was 19, so it didn't matter, but I still had a lot of ability to adapt. But that's not doesn't make that doesn't make any sense. If we were up all night at a fire last night and you're back at work today and there's nothing that has to be done, create a culture where it's okay to have everybody lay down for an hour. Um, so I can only really say what I did as a leader, both as a captain and as a battalion chief is there's a difference between being lazy and sitting in the recliner between from lunch until dinner time or laying down and taking an hour nap. Those are two different things. And laying down or sitting in the recliner watching baseball afternoon is actually not even that restful because you didn't allow your brain to rest. So I was a big proponent that if you have everything done that you have to do and you were up last night, please take a nap. I encourage that. And your people feel supported. It creates a culture where they're not afraid that the chief's going to show up or they're not afraid the captain's going to see their eyes closed. That rest when you can, if it's appropriate, is a culture shift that I think needs to happen because it seems like more and more and more we hear about people that are pushed more and more, more mandatories, more understaffed, systems that are busier. And so when you have an opportunity to rest, it should be okay to rest no matter what the clock says.
Excellent. We got a good question here. How do you convince the administration of a fire department that refuses to recognize these issues, volunteer or career? I'll give my 2 cents first, and I'd love yours, Sydney. Mine, from having been a union vice president for a big organization and then being a fire chief for two separate departments, the power is in numbers, and it's being unified in, hey, this is a problem. I remember as a fire chief up at Lake Tahoe, the guys and girls were just getting overworked. And so we had an ops meeting. And so I had the entire fire department there in one room with me saying, this is too much. Something has to happen. And so it from my perspective was like, okay, this is something I can't ignore. Not that I was, it was just, I could see there's a big difference in the power in numbers. And so I think that's one of the best approaches, having something to back up your argument as well. If there's stats. And so what I use with the firefighters is, when I was making that argument, was looking at the amount of overtime everyone was working, the amount of strike teams they're going out on, and presenting that. So I had facts on my side to present the argument. Sort of like an attorney going into a courtroom, you want to have your facts straight so that you can and not only anticipate their arguments, but have something ready to go for them. So that's the approach I found as like a union officer and so on. But Sydney, I'd love to get your take.
I agree with you 100%. There is plenty of scientific evidence to show the benefits of these things. The downfall, lack of sleep. There's so much information available to us for you to prove um, how beneficial it is. And the other thing, I think a lot of organizations. This might be more for career. Anytime that you convince your administration that this might help reduce sick leave and reduce workers' comp, a lot of times that's a pretty easy sell. Um, and and that's not a lie, right? If you invest in your personnel's stress management and sleep and health, you are going to have people who don't reach the breaking point, or aren't just calling in sick because they're burned out, or haven't gotten injured because their inflammation is so bad. And so these things really are an investment long term in a reduction in work time lost.
Yeah. And if everyone doesn't mind taking a look at the chat, we have a great comment here about how an agency developed a policy that really helped address the fatigue factor. And I could say that when I worked at AMR ambulance back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had a fatigue policy. And so basically, if we went fatigue, it meant that we were down for 4 hours. At least I think it was 4 hours, something like that, to where it took us off. Like we were only called if there was like just a down to like level one in the county where we were at. So having a policy, back to the original question, if there's a policy that you can negotiate in place, then that's always something you can fall back on, because then you can grieve it if the administration doesn't follow that policy. So yeah, thank you, Darren, for sharing that. Um, and let's see, what else do we have? Actually, one quick comment on if the fire department flat refuses. As fire chief, I was the king up until 3 of my 5 board members said, no, you're not. And so as an organization, if the administration isn't listening, there's nothing that precludes you from going to the elected body that governs the organization. So you can always go to them and say, hey, look, we're protecting the community, the people that elected you. And so, we're trying to convince someone to look out for our folks' well-being. And if they have an enlightened self-interest of, hey, I need to keep my workforce happy or they're going to leave, or something worse going to happen, then that they will act. I've seen that work time and time again when a fire chief didn't listen, but the governing body then said, hey, you need to listen, or we're going to find someone that will.
I think also don't underestimate the power of the informal leaders to create culture in your department too. And when you can shift the culture from the bottom up, that does work too.
Yeah. Yep. Um, let's see. I think that's about it on what the questions I have. I see no more in the chat. Sydney, I've known you for decades. We grew up together in the fire service. What other thoughts do you have that we could kind of send people off with, and kind of leave them with after this conversation?
Well, my mission is really for my clients and the people that I interact with, to recognize that I want you to be a burden on your retirement system. I want you to retire well and live healthy and have your go years for many years after you retire. In order to do that, you have to recognize that any small symptoms that you have now are signs that your body is not thriving. And so I had acid reflux years before my hair fell out. I had a warning sign maybe 10 years before my hair started falling out, but I didn't go get help until then. And so just because your symptoms are common does not mean that they are normal. And if you can get to the bottom of those symptoms sooner rather than later, then you don't allow all that damage to occur in your body, and you just create this health and longevity so that you can retire and be a burden on the retirement system.
Good stuff. Appreciate it. So we'll close out with that. I don't see any other questions. I really want to thank everyone for signing up. Again, the Carlson Center at Sac State with Cameron Law for supporting these webinars. And then, of course, Sydney. She's one of my favorite people on the planet, and I can't thank her enough for sharing this. We will create a video and a link that we will send to everyone that they're welcome to share with other folks. And we'd also love to hear feedback on future webinars you might want. You can just reach out to us and let us know what kind of guests and topics you'd like to see in the future. Our last one had a former DEA agent. We're lucky enough to get Sydney today, and so let us know what you might want to see in the future. So with that, I'll just say thank you, and I'm sorry, someone asked about CEUs. We don't offer CEUs for the class. I'm sorry. But you can take our video, give it to your EMS agency, and maybe they will share it, and that could get you some CEUs, continuing education units. So great question as we close out. So thank you, everyone, and be safe out there.